Okay, night 2. Anarchy Works. This is chapter 5 of a book that was printed out as a zine. It is by Peter Gelderloos, and I did not look that up to see if I've said it right, so let's hope. Okay, let's see where we need to get. Probably would have been real good for me to look that up ahead of time. However, okay, so our next section is, what about gangs and bullies? Okay. Some fear that in a society without authorities, the strongest people would run amok, taking and doing whatever they wanted. Never mind that this describes what generally goes on in societies with government. True. This fear derives from the statist myth that we are all isolated. The government would very much like you to believe that without its protection, you are vulnerable to the whims of anyone stronger than you. However, no bully is stronger than an entire community. A person who shatters the social peace, disrespects another person's needs, and acts in an authoritarian, bullying way can be defeated or kicked out by neighbors working together to restore the peace. You are not alone. I am not alone. We are not independent. We are interdependent. Get off my soapbox. In Christiania, I don't know how to say that, and I feel like, I don't know. Anyway, the anti-authoritarian autonomous quarter in Denmark's capital, they have been dealing with their own problems, and the problems associated with all the visitors they receive and the resulting high social mobility. Many people come as tourists, and many more come to buy hash. There are no laws in Christiania, and soft drugs are easy to come by, though hard drugs have been successfully banned. Within Christiania, there are numerous workshops that produce a variety of goods. Most famously, there are high-quality bicycles. There are also restaurants, cafes, a kindergarten, a clinic, a health food shop, a bookshop, an anarchist space, and a concert venue. Christiania has never been successfully dominated by gangs or resident bullies. In 1984, a motorcycle gang moved in, hoping to exploit the lawlessness of the autonomous zone and monopolize the hash trade. After several conflicts, the residents of Christiania succeeded in kicking out the bikers, using mostly peaceful tactics. I was going to say protest, but that's not the word. The worst bullying has come from the police, who recently resumed entering Christiania to arrest people for marijuana and hash, generally as a pretext to escalate tensions. Local real estate developers would love to see the Free State destroyed because it sits on land that has become very valuable. Decades ago, the residents of Christiania had a heated debate on how to deal with the problem of hard drugs coming in from the outside. Over much opposition, they decided to ask the police for help, only to find that the police concentrated on locking people up for soft drugs and protected the spread of hard drugs like heroin, presumably in the hope that an addiction epidemic would destroy the autonomous social experiment. It is by no means the first time police or other agents of the state have spread addictive drugs while suppressing soft or hallucinogenic drugs. In fact, this seems universally to be a part of police strategies for repression. In the end, the residents of Christiania kicked out the police and dealt with the hard drug problem themselves by kicking out dealers and using social pressure to discourage hard drug use. In Christiania, as elsewhere, the state represents the greatest danger to the community. Unlike the individual bullies one imagines terrorizing a lawless society, the state cannot easily be defeated. Typically, the state seeks a monopoly on force, on the pretext of protecting citizens from other bullies. This is the justification for prohibiting anyone outside the state apparatus from using force, especially in self-defense against the government. In return for relinquishing this power, citizens are directed to the court system as a means of defending their interests. But of course, the court system is a part of the state and protects its interests above all others. We cannot delude ourselves about that. The state protects its interests above all others. When the government comes to seize your land to build a shopping mall, for example, you can take the matter to court, or even bring it before the city council. But you might find yourself talking to someone who stands to profit from the shopping mall. The bullies' courts will not be fair to the bullies' victims, and they will not sympathize with you if you defend yourself against the eviction. Instead, they'll lock you up. In this context, those who want a resolution often have to seek it outside the courts. A military dictatorship seized power in Argentina in 1976 and waged a dirty war against leftists, torturing and killing 30,000 people. The officers responsible for the torture and executions were pardoned by the democratic government that succeeded the dictatorship. The mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, who began gathering to demand an end to the disappearances and to know what happened to their children, were an important social force in ending the reign of terror. As the government has never taken serious steps to hold the murderers and torturers accountable, people have elaborated a popular justice that builds on and goes beyond the protests and memorials organized by the mothers. When a participant in the dirty war is located, activists put up posters throughout the neighborhood informing everyone of his presence. They may ask local shops to refuse the person entry and follow and harass him. In a tactic known as escrache, hundreds or thousands of participants will march to the house of a dirty war participant with signs, banners, puppets, and drums. They sing, chant, and make music for hours, shaming the torturer and letting everyone know what he has done. The crowd may attack his house with paint bombs. Despite a justice system that protects the powerful, the social movements of Argentina have organized collectively to shame and isolate the very worst bullies. So that was a shorter section, but that's okay. Let's keep going. My dog really wants to get up on the couch, but it's like a little taller than she wants to. So she doesn't want to, she's like, nope, don't want to do it. Okay. So the next section. It's a good question. What's to stop someone from killing people? Okay. I know this stuff is scary. I know it's hard to consider what it would be like without law and order, because we've been told our whole lives that we need to be afraid of our neighbors or the people who are just outside of being our neighbors, just outside of our community. We're always told to be afraid of outsiders. But, the outsiders are not your enemy. They're not your oppressor. All right, so what's to stop someone from killing people? Much violent crime can be traced back to cultural factors. Violent crime, such as murder, would probably decrease dramatically in an anarchist society because most of its causes, poverty, televised glorification of violence, prisons and police, warfare, sexism, and the normalization of individualistic and antisocial behaviors, would disappear or decrease. The differences between two Zapotec communities illustrates that peace is a choice. The Zapotec are a sedentary agrarian indigenous nation living on land that is now claimed by the state of Mexico. One Zapotec community, La Paz, has a yearly homicide rate of 3.4 out of every 100,000. A neighboring Zapotec community has a much higher homicide rate of 18.1 out of every 100,000. What social attributes go along with the more peaceful way of life? Unlike their more violent neighbors, the La Paz Zapotec do not beat children. Accordingly, children see less violence and use less violence in their play. Similarly, wife beating is rare and not considered acceptable. Women are considered equal to men and enjoy an autonomous economic activity that is important to the life of the community, so they are not dependent on men. Regarding child rearing, the implications of this particular comparison are corroborated by at least one cross-cultural study on socialization, which found that warm, affectionate socialization techniques correlate with low levels of conflict in society. The Sami and the Norwegians were both previously mentioned as societies with low homicide rates. Until colonialism, the Sami were stateless, whereas Norway is ruled by a government. Socialization is relatively peaceful among the Sami and the Norwegians alike. The Sami use a gift economy, so wealth is evenly distributed, while Norway has one of the lowest wealth gaps of any capitalist country on account of its socialist domestic policies. A further similarity is a reliance on mediation rather than punishment, police, or prisons to solve disputes. Norway does have police and a prison system, but compared with most states, there is a high reliance on conflict mediation mechanisms, not unlike those that flourish in peaceful stateless societies. Most civil disputes in Norway must be brought before mediators before they can be taken to court, and thousands of criminal cases are taken to mediators as well. In 2001, an agreement was reached in 89% of the mediations. 89%. That's pretty freaking good. So in an anarchist society, violent crime would be less common. But when it did occur, would society be more vulnerable? After all, one might argue, even when violence is no longer a rational social response, psychopathic killers might still occasionally appear. Psychopathic, I mean, that kind of is a little stigmatizing of a word, but let's just say it, okay? Let it suffice to say that any society capable of overthrowing a government would hardly be at the mercy of lone psychopathic killers. We gotta say it again. Okay. And societies that do not come from a revolution but enjoy a strong sense of community and solidarity are capable of protecting themselves as well. The Inuit, hunter-gatherers indigenous to the Arctic regions of North America, provide an example of what a stateless society can do in the worst-case scenario. According to their traditions, if a person committed a murder, the community would forgive him and make him reconcile with the family of the victim. If that person commits another murder, he would be killed, usually by members of his own family group, so there would be no bad blood or cause for feud. The state's punitive methods for dealing with crime make things worse, not better. The restorative methods for responding to social harm that are used in many stateless societies open new possibilities for escaping the cycles of abuse, punishment, and harm that are all too familiar to many of us. I think one of the things that a lot of people who don't understand what we want as opposed to law and order is that they've never really heard of restorative justice and seen it play out. They don't really understand the impacts of trauma and poverty and all those things on someone, to commit a crime or do something awful in the first place. And then, so they don't understand, how not easy, but simple it can be to, offer someone restorative options that will bring them back into the community. And it's beautiful. Like, that's life-giving. All right. Side note is done. Okay. So, shift. I'm old and my hips hurt. Let's see how long the next section is. So maybe we'll just, it's not too bad. Okay. So, many of us want to know this. Not mostly. I think it's women and queer folks who have this on their minds most predominantly, but, men are definitely subject to this as well. So it's very, very important for everyone. So what about rape, domestic violence, and other forms of harm? Many actions that are considered crimes by our government are completely harmless. Some crimes, such as stealing from the wealthy or sabotaging instruments of warfare, can actually decrease harm. Still, a number of transgressions that are now considered crimes do constitute real social harm. Of these, murder is highly sensationalized, but rare compared to the other more common problems. Sexual and domestic violence are rampant in our society, and even in the absence of government and capitalism, these forms of violence will continue unless they are specifically addressed. Currently, many forms of sexual and domestic violence are commonly tolerated. Some are even subtly encouraged in Hollywood, churches, and other mainstream institutions. Hollywood often sexualizes rape, and along with other corporate media and most major religions, glorifies female passivity and servility. In the discourse these institutions influence, the severe problem of spousal rape is ignored, and as a result, many people even believe that a husband cannot rape a wife because they are joined in contractual sexual union. News media and Hollywood movies regularly portray rape as an act committed by a stranger, especially a poor non-white stranger. In this version, a woman's only hope is to be protected by the police or a boyfriend. But in fact, the vast majority of rapes are committed by boyfriends, friends, family, and in situations that fall in a gray area between the mainstream definitions of consent and force. That was an awkward pause, I'm sorry, because it's not just boyfriends and, family members and friends are huge contributors. So, let's keep going. More frequently, Hollywood ignores the problems of rape, abuse, and domestic violence altogether while perpetuating the myth of love at first sight. In this myth, the man wins over the woman, and the two fulfill each other's emotional and sexual needs, making a perfect match without having to talk about consent, work on communication, or navigate emotional and sexual boundaries. I don't know what you're doing. Okay. Police and other institutions purporting to protect women from rape counsel women not to resist for fear of aggravating their attacker, when all evidence and common sense suggests that resistance is often one's best chance. The state rarely offers self-defense classes to women, while frequently prosecuting women who kill or injure attackers in self-defense. Weird how that works, huh? People who go to the state to report sexual or physical assault face added humiliation. Courts question the honesty and moral integrity of women who bravely go public after being sexually assaulted. Women, men, non-binary people. Judges award custody of children to abusive fathers. Police ignored domestic violence calls, even standing by as husbands beat wives. Some local regulations require the police to arrest someone, or even both parties, in a domestic violence call. Often a woman who calls for help herself is sent to jail. Oh, this has happened so many times. Transgender people are betrayed even more regularly by the legal system, which refuses to respect their identities and often forces them in prison cells with people of different genders. Working class and homeless transgender people are systematically raped by agents of the legal system. A great deal of abuse not directly caused by the authorities is a result of people taking out their anger on those below them in the social hierarchy. Children, who tend to be at the bottom of the pyramid, ultimately receive a great deal of this abuse. The authorities who are supposed to keep them safe, parents, relatives, priests, teachers, are the ones most likely to abuse them. Seeking help may only make things worse because at no point does the legal system allow them to regain control over their lives, even though it is this control that survivors of abuse need most. Instead, each case is decided by social workers and judges with little knowledge of the situation and hundreds of other cases to arbitrate. The current paradigm of punishing offenders and ignoring the needs of victims has proven a total failure, and increased enforcement of laws would not change this. People who abuse were often abused themselves. Sending them to prison does not make them any less likely to act abusively. People who survive abuse may benefit from having a safe space. But sending their abusers to prison removes the chance of reconciliation, and if they depend economically on their abusers, as is often the case, they may choose not to report the crime for fear of ending up homeless, poor, or in foster care. Under the state, we address sexual and domestic violence as crimes, violations of the victim's state-mandated rights, unacceptable because they defy the commandments of the state. In contrast, many stateless societies have used a needs-based paradigm. This paradigm frames these forms of violence as social harm, thus focusing on the needs of the survivor to heal and the need of the offender to become a healthy person who can relate to the broader community. Because these acts of social harm do not happen in isolation, this paradigm draws in the entire community and seeks to restore a broad social peace while respecting the autonomy and self-defined needs of each individual. So that might sound a little bit abstract, but that's okay. It can be hard to understand what that might look like, especially when it can sound really triggering and like you're letting the offender get off the hook. But, there's more than one way to look at things, This is tough, and we have to be willing to look at things differently. The Navajo method of peacemaking has survived for centuries, despite the violence of colonialism. They are currently reviving this method to deal with social harm and decrease their dependence on the U.S. government, and people studying restorative justice are looking to the Navajo example for guidance. In the Navajo practice of restorative justice, a person respected by all parties as fair and impartial acts as a peacemaker. A person might seek out a peacemaker if she is seeking help with a problem on her own volition, if her community or family is concerned about her behavior, if she has hurt someone or has been hurt by someone, or if she is in a dispute with another person that the two need help solving. Contrast this with the statist system of punitive justice, in which people only receive attention, and always negative attention, when they commit a statutory offense. The harm itself and the reasons they are causing it are irrelevant to the judicial process. The purpose of the Navajo process is to meet the needs of those who come to the peacemaker and to find the root of the problem. When members of the Navajo community try to explain why people do harm to themselves or others, they say that those responsible for a harm behave that way because they have become disconnected from the world around them, from the people they live and work with. They say that the person acts as if he has no relatives. The peacemakers solve this by talking things out and helping the person who harmed to reconnect with his community and regain the support and groundedness he needs to act in a healthy way. Additionally, they provide support for the person who was harmed, looking for ways to help that person feel safe and whole again. To this end, the peacemaking process involves the family and friends of those involved. People present their stories, their perspectives on the problem, and their feelings. The ultimate goal is to find a practical solution that restores people's relationships. To aid this, the peacemaker delivers a homily that often draws on Navajo creation stories to show how traditional figures have dealt with the same problems in the past. In cases where there is clearly someone who acted wrongly and harmed another person, at the end of the process the offender often pays an agreed-upon amount of restitution, or nalyi. I hope I said that right. However, nalyi is not a form of punishment in the spirit of an eye for an eye, but rather a way to make things right for the person who has suffered a loss. 104 of the 110 chapters or semi-autonomous communities of the Navajo Nation currently have designated peacemakers, and in many instances in the past, respected family members have been called on to settle disputes in an unofficial capacity. Critical Resistance is an anti-authoritarian organization in the U.S. formed by ex-prisoners and family members of prisoners with the purpose of abolishing the prison system and its causes. As of this writing, the group is working on setting up harm-free zones. The purpose of a harm-free zone is to provide tools and trainings to local communities to strengthen and develop their ability to resolve conflicts without the need for police, court system, or the prison industry. The harm-free zone practices an abolitionist approach to developing communities, which means building models today that can represent how we want to live now and in the future. By building stronger relationships among neighbors and intentionally creating common resources, people in a neighborhood can keep out drug dealers, provide support for those suffering from addiction, intervene in abusive family situations, set up childcare and alternatives to joining gangs, and increase face-to-face communication. Other anti-authoritarian groups, some inspired by this model, have begun the hard work of setting up harm-free zones in their own cities. Of course, even if there were no violent crime at all, a racist, capitalist government would still find excuses to lock people up. Creating internal enemies and punishing rebels have always been functions of the government, and nowadays so many private companies are invested in the prison system that it has become a growth-based industry. Gotta love capitalism. And by gotta love, I mean you do not have to love it. There is other choices. But when people are no longer dependent on police and prisons, when communities are no longer crippled by self-inflicted social harm, it is much easier to organize resistance. Throughout the United States and other countries, feminists have organized an event called Take Back the Night to address violence against women. Once a year, a large group of women and their supporters march through their neighborhood or campus at night, a time when many women associate with increased risk of sexual assault, to reclaim their environment and make the issue visible. These events usually include education about the prevalence and causes of violence against women. Some Take Back the Night groups also address our society's rampant violence against transgender people. The first Take Back the Night march took place in Belgium in 1976, organized by women attending the International Tribunal on Crimes Against Women. The event takes much from its tradition of Walpurgisnacht protests in Germany, known as Witches' Night. April 30th, the night before May Day, is a traditional night for pranks, rioting, and pagan and feminist resistance. In 1977, German feminists involved with the autonomous movement marched on Walpurgisnacht under the banner Women Take Back the Night. The first Take Back the Night in the U.S. occurred November 4th, 1977, in San Francisco's Red Light District. Such an action is an important first step in creating a collective force capable of changing society. Under patriarchy, every family is isolated, and though many people suffer the same problems, they do so alone. Gathering together to talk about a problem that has been unspeakable, to reclaim a public space that has been denied to you, the nighttime streets, is a living metaphor for the anarchist society in which people come together to overcome any authority figure, any oppressor. Sexual violence affects everyone in a patriarchal society. It occurs in radical communities that are opposed to sexism and sexual violence. Unless they sincerely focus on unlearning patriarchal conditioning, self-professed radicals often respond to rape, harassment, and other forms of abuse and sexual violence with the same behavior that is all too common in the rest of society. Ignoring them, justifying them, refusing to take a stand, not believing or even blaming the survivor. In order to combat this, feminists and anarchists in Philadelphia formed two groups, The first, Philly's Pissed, works to support survivors of sexual violence. So here's another excerpt type thing. All of Philly's Pissed work is done confidentially, unless the survivor requests otherwise. We are not certified experts, but a group of people whose lives have been repeatedly affected by sexual assault and are doing our best to make a safer world. We respect our own and others' knowledge to figure out what feels safest for each person. Philly's Pissed supports survivors of sexual assault by meeting their immediate needs as well as helping them to articulate and facilitate what they need to make them feel safe and in control of their lives again. That's the end of the section. If a survivor demands to make If a survivor has demands to make of his or her assaulter, that he or she receive counseling, publicly apologize, or never come near the survivor again, the support group delivers them. If the survivor wishes, the group may publicize the identity of the assaulter to warn other people or prevent the person from hiding his actions. The second group, Philly Stands Up, work with people who have committed sexual assault to support them through the process of taking responsibility for their actions, learning from them and changing their behaviors, and restoring healthy relationships with their community. The two groups also hold workshops in other cities to share their experiences responding to sexual assault. Okay, so that's the end of that section. So the next header we'll save for tomorrow, I think, because I think my voice is going to be pretty much shot. And yeah, I think that's all I got for tonight. So